Late 1960, California Coast Highway. The afternoon sun hung low over the highway, painting the asphalt gold, when Dean Martin slowed his car and noticed two figures waving. Not for fame, not for rescue, just for a ride they weren't sure anyone would give. They stood near a broken-down van, its paint faded into symbols and slogans that felt foreign to him. Long hair, loose clothes, bare feet on hot concrete, the kind of sight most men his age drove past without looking twice. Dean did look. He eased the car onto the shoulder, the engine humming like it was unsure of the decision. For a moment he stayed seated, hands resting on the wheel. He was used to eyes on him, admiring, judging, wanting something. Today, the eyes staring back were wary, defensive, almost surprised. He rolled the window down halfway. "You girls all right?" he asked. The taller one nodded too quickly. "Van overheated. We're trying to get to the coast." Her voice shook despite the confidence she tried to borrow. The other girl said nothing. She clutched a small bag to her chest like it was a shield. Dean studied them, not as symbols of a movement but as people. Young, tired, out of place in a country that didn't know what to do with them. "Hop in," he said. They hesitated. He smiled, not the stage smile but the smaller one. "Car still runs. I do too." They laughed despite themselves. The tension loosened just enough. They got in. The door shut, sealing them into a space that felt suddenly too quiet. Dean pulled back onto the road, the radio low. He could feel them watching him, trying to place the voice, the face. Recognition flickered. "You're," the quiet one started. "Just driving," Dean said gently. "That's all we're doing right now." Miles passed. Wind rushed through the open windows. The girl in the front seat traced patterns on the glass as if grounding herself. "Thank you," she said finally. "Most people don't stop." Dean nodded. Most people are in a hurry to get where they're going. The taller girl glanced at him. "Where are you going?" Dean smiled. "Same direction for now." They relaxed slowly, like animals realizing the trapdoor wasn't closing. Conversation came in pieces. Names offered, then pulled back. Stories half told. Dean didn't push. He had learned that silence could be kinder than questions. A police car passed them in the opposite lane. Both girls stiffened instantly. Dean noticed. "You expecting trouble?" he asked, keeping his eyes on the road. The taller girl swallowed. "We just don't have good luck." "With police," the quiet one added. Dean waited. "They think we're trouble," the taller girl continued, "just because we look like this." Dean glanced at them, really looked this time. "Are you?" The quiet girl shook her head. "We're just trying to get somewhere safe." Safe, the word lingered. Dean felt something tighten in his chest. He had grown up knowing what it meant to be judged before you spoke, to be measured by appearances and found wanting. The years had polished him, dressed him better, taught him how to pass. These girls hadn't learned that trick yet. Another police car passed. This time it slowed. Dean's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. The car behind them matched speed for a moment, too long to be coincidence. Then it fell back. The girls exchanged a look that carried more history than their age suggested. "They've been stopping vans like ours," the taller girl said quietly. "Questioning, searching, sometimes worse." Dean's jaw set. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said. "That doesn't always matter," the quiet one replied. Ahead, the road narrowed. A sign warned of a checkpoint due to routine patrol. Dean exhaled slowly. He realized then that this wasn't just a ride anymore. It was a line he'd crossed the moment he stopped the car. He could turn off now, let them out near a diner, wish them luck, drive away clean. Instead, he kept going. The police lights ahead flickered into view. The girls went silent. Dean straightened in his seat, already knowing. Whatever happened next, he wasn't letting them face it alone. The checkpoint sat across the road like an accusation. Two police cars angled inward, cones scattered carelessly. An officer leaned against a hood baton, tapping his palm in an idle rhythm. It didn't look urgent. That was the problem. Urgency could be argued with, casual authority could not. Dean slowed the car. Neither girl spoke. The quiet one stared straight ahead, breathing shallow, as if trying to make herself invisible. The taller girl's knee bounced uncontrollably, her confidence finally burned away. "You want me to turn around?" Dean asked softly. They looked at him together. Fear, yes, but also exhaustion. "They'll just stop us again," the taller girl said. "They always do." Dean nodded once and rolled forward. The officer stepped into the lane, hand raised. Dean stopped the car, lowered the window, and waited. He didn't reach for anything. He had learned long ago that calm, unsettled men who expected submission. "Afternoon," the officer said, eyes already drifting past Dean, locking onto the girls. "Where you folks headed?" "Down the coast," Dean replied evenly. The officer leaned closer, studying his face. Recognition flickered, but not enough yet. "Mind telling me who your passengers are?" "They're riding with me," Dean said. The officer's eyes hardened. That wasn't the question. Dean held his gaze, then asked a better one. The baton stopped tapping. "Out of the car," the officer said, nodding toward the girls. "Both of you." The taller girl flinched. The quiet one's hand tightened around her bag. Dean spoke before either could move. "Is there a reason?" The officer smiled thinly. "Routine." Dean glanced at the other officers. None were watching closely. They trusted the outcome. "These girls haven't done anything," Dean said. "If you've got a reason, say it, if not." The officer straightened. "You giving me instructions?" "I'm asking for clarity," Dean replied. "Seems fair." The officer exhaled sharply. "Step out of the vehicle, sir." Dean did. Up close, the height difference mattered. So did the uniform. Power liked to measure itself in inches and symbols. The officer looked him over again, longer this time, then it clicked. "You're Dean Martin." Dean nodded. "I am." The officer hesitated, recalibrating. Fame complicated things. It didn't erase authority, but it forced it to explain itself. "You know these girls?" the officer asked. Dean didn't miss the shift. "I know they needed a ride." "They look like trouble." Dean's voice stayed level. "They look young." Another officer wandered closer now, curiosity replacing boredom. "You carrying anything illegal?" the first officer asked the girls. "No," the quiet one whispered. "Mind if we check?" he pressed. Dean stepped slightly forward, not aggressive, just present. "On what grounds?" The officer's jaw tightened. "You trying to make this difficult?" Dean met his eyes. "You already did." Silence stretched. The sound of passing cars filled the gap. The taller girl finally spoke. "We were stopped yesterday and the day before. They searched our van, took our food, told us to move along." Her voice shook, but she didn't stop. "We're not hurting anyone." The officer scoffed. "You expect me to believe that?" Dean turned to him. "I do." The second officer cleared his throat. "Maybe we let them go." The first officer didn't look away from Dean. This wasn't about the girls anymore. It was about control. "You think because you're famous you can decide how this works?" he asked. Dean's expression didn't change. "No, I think because you're sworn to protect people you should." The words landed harder than raised voices ever could. A long moment passed. Finally the officer stepped back. "Get back in the car," he snapped. "All of you." No apology, no acknowledgement, just release delivered like a favor. Dean got in. The girls followed, hands still shaking. He pulled onto the road, heart steady, jaw tight. Neither spoke until the checkpoint disappeared behind them. "Why did you do that?" the taller girl asked quietly. Dean kept his eyes forward, because it doesn't get easier if nobody pushes back. The quiet one nodded, tears finally spilling. They scare us. Dean swallowed, I know. A few miles later, a siren sounded behind them again. Dean checked the mirror. Another police car. Following. The siren didn't blare at first. It hovered behind them like a thought that refused to leave. Dean kept the car steady, speed unchanged. The road stretched narrow and open, scrubland on both sides, nowhere to turn without announcing fear. In the mirror, red and blue lights flickered once, then went dark. A warning, a reminder. The quiet girl's breath hitched. They're still there. I see them, Dean said. The patrol car followed at a distance that felt deliberate, not stopping them yet, letting the pressure build. Dean had seen that tactic before, just dressed differently. Power liked anticipation. It made people confess before being asked. After another mile, the lights came back on, this time fully. Dean signaled and pulled over. The officer approached slower than before, hand resting near his holster. Different man, younger, less certain. That made him more dangerous. Sir, the officer said, step out of the vehicle. Dean did. You were released back there, the officer continued. Why didn't you turn off when directed? Dean frowned slightly. No one directed me anywhere. The officer's jaw tightened. You were advised to leave the area. Dean nodded. I did. I'm leaving it right now. The officer glanced past him at the girls. We received a call. Description matches. 2 young women causing disturbances. Dean turned his head just enough to block the officer's line of sight. From where? Multiple reports, the officer replied, vague by design. Dean folded his arms. Names. The officer hesitated. That's not how this works. Dean leaned in just slightly. Then this isn't how justice works either. The officer stiffened. You're interfering. Dean's voice dropped. I'm witnessing. The officer's radio crackled. A voice murmured something unintelligible. He listened, nodded, then looked back at Dean with new resolve. We're going to search the vehicle. Dean shook his head once. You don't have cause. The officer took a step closer. Sir, don't make this harder. Dean held his ground. I'm not the one doing that. Another car pulled up behind the first. Reinforcements. The girls sat frozen inside, eyes wide, watching men decide their fate without looking at them. Dean raised his voice, just enough for them to hear. Stay where you are, he said calmly. You haven't done anything wrong. The officer scoffed. You their lawyer now. Dean met his stare. I'm their witness. The second officer approached, older, tired eyes scanning the scene. He recognized Dean immediately. Recognition again, always late, always inconvenient. What's the issue? The older officer asked. Possible vagrancy, the younger one said. Suspicion of narcotics. Dean didn't react, he waited. The older officer studied the girls, then Dean, then the empty stretch of road. You want to run this up the chain? The older officer asked quietly. The younger officer bristled. We have authority. So does paperwork, the older man replied, and attention. That word landed. Dean didn't smile. He didn't need to. The presence of consequence had entered the conversation. The older officer turned to Dean. Sir, you willing to vouch for them? Dean answered without hesitation. Yes. Take responsibility, the officer pressed. Dean nodded, that too. The younger officer's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at the cars passing by, at the emptiness that would remember this moment longer than any report. Get back in your car, the older officer said finally, all of you. The younger officer stared, incredulous. That's it. That's it, the older man repeated. We're done. Dean got in. The engine turned over. The car pulled back onto the road. They drove in silence for several minutes before the taller girl spoke. her voice barely holding together. "You didn't have to do that." Dean glanced at her in the mirror. "I did." The quiet girl wiped her face. "They could have arrested us." Dean nodded. "They could have. And you still." Dean's grip tightened on the wheel. "If I'd driven away," he said, "I'd still be driving." They reached a turnoff toward the coast. The ocean appeared in the distance, calm and indifferent. Dean slowed. "This is where I leave you," he said gently. The girls looked at him, panic flashing again. "You're sure?" the taller one asked. Dean parked and turned off the engine. "I'm sure." He reached into his jacket and handed them a folded paper, an address, a name. "They'll help you," he said. "Tell them I sent you." They took it like it was fragile. As they stepped out of the car, Dean felt the weight of eyes on his back. Not police this time, but something larger. The cost hadn't arrived yet. But it was coming. The ocean air cooled the day, carrying salt and distance with it. Dean watched the girls walk toward the address he'd given them, their silhouettes shrinking against the wide promise of the coast. They didn't look back, not because they were ungrateful, but because forward was finally possible. He waited until they disappeared from view before starting the engine again. Nothing happened right away. No sirens, no sudden consequences, just the road, open and quiet, daring him to believe that decency could pass unnoticed. It didn't. In the weeks that followed, small things changed. A booking delayed. A phone call returned late, if at all. Invitations softened into suggestions. Then vanished. No one said why, no one had to. Dean understood the language. He'd heard it before in different rooms, with different uniforms. This was how power reminded you it had a memory. He didn't talk about the girls, didn't tell the story at parties or in interviews. He knew better than to turn protection into performance. Whatever that moment had been, it belonged to them more than him. Months later, a letter arrived. No return address, just careful handwriting uneven in places. "We made it," it said. "We're safe. Someone helped us like you said they would. We don't know how to thank you without making it small." Dean folded the letter and placed it in a drawer with things he didn't show anyone. That was how kindness worked, he'd learned. It didn't announce itself. It waited quietly until it was needed again. Years passed. The country kept arguing with itself. Authority kept mistaking control for order. Young people kept being told they were the problem. And every so often, someone with a little leverage chose not to look away. Dean never claimed credit, but others noticed the pattern. A driver who stopped. A producer who asked questions. A witness who stayed. Not movements, moments. One night long after the hair had gone gray and the road felt shorter than it used to, Dean was asked about courage. The question came casually, like most important ones do. He thought of the checkpoint, the siren, the girls gripping their fear like luggage they'd been carrying too long. "I think courage," he said slowly, "is deciding who you don't want to be." The interviewer waited for more. Dean smiled. "That's enough." History rarely remembers the rides taken between headlines, the conversations that never became scandals, the protections that worked precisely because they stayed quiet. But for two young women who reached the ocean instead of a cell, the moment never faded. It shaped how they saw men in power, how they trusted later, how they stood when it was their turn. And for Dean, it settled something he'd always known, but rarely needed to test. That brotherhood isn't about likeness. That moral courage doesn't announce itself. That injustice thrives on indifference, not strength. He had not changed the system. He hadn't meant to. He had simply refused to let it pass through him unchecked. Long after the uniforms changed and the slogans aged into history, the lesson remained intact, carried quietly from one ordinary decision to the next. Sometimes, standing against injustice doesn't look like protest or defiance. Sometimes it looks like stopping the car and choosing not to drive away.